friend in college who saw Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe with me, and he was like, "Wow, that's a really nice." All those kids were struggling with having no father in the home, and they projected it into this talking lion character. And I said, "Do you realize this is just some big? It's just a giant allegory for the gospel." And he's like, "Oh, come on, you Christians, you see everything through the lens. Like, Jesus isn't everywhere, guys."
That's an example of like you winning an internet debate before it happened.
Ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages, it is Wednesday. It is the Mattriarchy, and I am, as per typical, your host, Matt Reese. Today, we are leaving our beloved lower 48, the field of old glory, and we are transgressing the border and into the heart of our top hat, Canada. Today, and for the following 5 weeks, we are discussing in depth Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Scott Pilgrim is the series as a whole. And this may be our greatest challenge ever, because Metal and I, we're pretty big fans of Scott Pilgrim, wouldn't you say there, Metal?
Yeah, I don't know if you could tell from my screen.
Yeah, pretty big fan. and Cartoonicus and Twitless both came to us individually and said, I don't know that we should be on the show. I think I hate this.
Yeah.
We like a little disagreement. We like a little fire.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for a second there, I thought you had run off and left me to face these guys alone.
Did I hear this right? Or is Cartoonicus and I are on the same page for once?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's the real rare thing there. I can't remember the last time you and I had the same opinion.
So yeah, we're excited. I'm excited for this thing. Something we've been talking about for 6 months, I think. Where we were talking about that. Because I went through. I'd seen the film. I actually went through and read the whole corpus, and Jim Tudor says, "Come on, just call Scott Pilgrim out as satanic or demon based or something. You know you wanna."
I can't even do that. Yeah, I can't even do that. I'm just. We'll get into it.
We'll get into it. So, let's get a little bit of texture. Metal, since you are by far the biggest Scott Pilgrim fan, what was your initial exposure to Scott Pilgrim?
My initial exposure. Oh. It was not the movie, but it was the movie, right? The movie was coming out, and I didn't know this thing existed prior to that. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I was reading up on it, and I found out that it was based off of a comic. So then I went and binged all of the comics up to that point, which left me at 5 out of 6, because the 6th volume hadn't been finished yet. So I had to go and finish that later. But I don't know. Since then, I've really liked it. I really like the graphic novels, all the little side comics. There's like 3 or 4 of them. The video game, the movie, and I'm excited for the animation that's coming up.
Hold on. The movie was made before the final book was?
Yes.
Yet it included all 7.
6.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
70
the movie influenced the ending of the final book.
Oh my gosh, it's Game of Thrones all over again.
We'll have to talk about that. Well, I mean, part of it. See, part of the thing is when the movie was originally picked up. This is deep weeds stuff, but for this part of the conversation, it's germane. When the movie was originally picked up, it was pitched as a trilogy, and so the first film was supposed to be the first 2 volumes, right? Scott Pilgrim's Pretty Precious Little Life and Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and then 3 and 4. I don't remember the names right now. Don't bother me. was going to be movie 2, and then 5 and 6 was movie 3. So the idea was, there'll be plenty of time to finish volume 6 before we get to movie 3. But that didn't happen. Nick has joined us and says, "What is up, everyone?" We are here. We are here to knock down, drag out in true Canadian style.
Also, the names of the other ones are Infinite Sadness versus the Universe, Gets It Together, and Finest Hour.
There you go. I was gonna get to it when I got to it, but that's fine. But yeah, so that was part of it. And O'Malley was also like on set and heavily involved with the script writers as they were working out the movie as well. So there's that to be said for the film as well. But yes, so of course we have 1,000 pages condensed into a 2-hour film. So there'll be some stuff to talk about here today. So do we want to for you guys, for Twitless and Cartoonicus, was this in preparing for the show the first time you had read Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life?
Yes, it was. In
Yeah,
fact,
yeah.
I have gotten through the first 3 chapters, I think. I mean, volumes at this point. Assuming that we were doing one big Scott Pilgrim night. I did not know we were going to be splitting it up into chapters.
Oh, did we not tell you about the 6-week pilgrimage?
No, you did not. I have a feeling I know why.
I thought I'd been more explicit about that. Oops.
The main reason so that we can keep each of these episodes to like an hour.
that is a big factor.
Yeah.
Well, this year was the first time I had read Scott Pilgrim, and I've mentioned this on stream before. But for those of you who are just tuning in, what it was is I had seen the movie. I had a hankering to watch the movie again, and my kids are old enough to enjoy something like that. And so we sat down with it, and my youngest son, I said, "What do you think?" And he says, "Well, it was a pretty good movie about terrible people." And that kind of stuck around in my head. I felt the need to seek out the comic after all of this. But I got the first volume from the local library and devoured that, and then checked out 2 through 6. And that whole weekend, I just poured through all of them. It was pretty insane. But there you have it. So
I have to admit, while I've been reading through this, I've been thinking they should rename the entire series to just Terrible People Being Terrible People by Doing Terrible Things That Are Terrible.
you could do that, but I don't know that certainly wouldn't sound as punchy. But yeah, so there we are. So do we want to go ahead? I think we've pretty well staked out our positions at this point. We want to dig into the stories themselves a little, talk about what's going on with the thingamy. Ooh, color.
Yeah, I read the black and white version, but for what I'm displaying, it's from the color. So that's another thing to discuss. This is one of those books that's got the traditional kind of, not traditional, but I think it's printed originally more manga style, essentially, or American manga style. And then I think, because this was with Oni Press, which is not necessarily like the biggest publisher. So I'm guessing because it got, it was well received, they were able to re-release it in a higher quality color. So that's
well, it was there was some limited color, but that's only if you happen to get like one of the holographic covers, like the rare prints of it. Like the first page or 2 would be in color, but yeah, the original book was entirely in black and white.
Yeah.
I will admit this is actually a very artistically creative image here. I like that.
Scott Pilgrim for me perfectly encapsulates the concept of style over substance, in my opinion. So I don't have tons of criticism for like some of the clever stylistic things it does, because I'm like, oh, that's neat. And I am a sucker for some of those. So
Right.
yeah.
I can definitely see that. And I think the style that it brought is just super fun. I cannot. I just really enjoy, and it's not necessarily the style of cartooning, but the simplicity of the design was just so much fun to see. So that's kind of how where I sit on that as far as the thing goes. I thought that the way that O'Malley's able to really use expressiveness in his cartooning also lends a lot to it, because the basic story, the basic premise of the story, if we can dig into that a little bit, is that Scott Pilgrim is this Gen X slacker who is living in Toronto, and he's really slumming it through life, right? When we meet him first, he's playing in a crappy garage band, and he's dating a 17-year-old. He's 22, if I remember right. He's dating a 17-year-old, not because he's romantically interested in her, but because there's no stakes, because things can't get serious because she's young.
He's 23. He was 22 in the movie because Michael Cera was 21, and they just split the difference between the age of him and the character.
There you have it.
Yeah, he's 23. Yeah.
Yeah. So, he starts off, and he's and it is very much of a slice of life story that goes into all of this. And one of the things I was immediately taken with in reading it, and it was there in the movie, but really drew, one of the things that really drew me in, it's never sunny in Toronto. What really drew me in, part of it was the aesthetics of the underground band scene that they're all in the middle of, because from my own my own young adulthood as a Gen X slacker, that's the circles that I was in as well. And so there was a relationship that I felt to the work on a reminiscence level. So, which, that may be something that other people did not relate to, but that's something that I dug on. Jim Tuner says gross. That's actually part of the point. Is that it's supposed to be off-putting. But Scott doesn't have his own place. He doesn't have many of his own things. He's somewhat estranged from his parents for most of the work, which is weird in its own sake. And somehow he's supposed to be our hero. Let me ask you, Twitless, is that position something that you found off-putting?
Yes and no. So on the one hand, I think it's perfectly fine to make a total, essentially a total, and I don't know if I'd call him a Gen Xer. He struck me as highly millennial. But
yeah, very millennial.
However you want to interpret him.
Well, I'm just saying, based upon the age he was at production. I mean, he's supposed to be
Let's just say he's a young person.
He's supposed to be 23 in 2003. So, by definition,
I would put it.
I have a feeling this will work in just about any generation.
The band, there you go. The band aspect of him, I think, is very Gen X. And I think that everything else about his personality is very millennial. So I would definitely say he's essentially like the archetype of both. He's got this like Gen X, like I'm in a garage band, and it's like, no, I don't know any millennials who are like garage bandies. But then he has the obsession with like video games and video game culture and nerd stuff. That's very millennial. Where it's like, I'm gonna basically name my band after an enemy from the Super Mario Brothers video game. Like you have to be like
a Tom Jones
gamer to so there's that blend, I guess, where you're either gonna connect with the music reference
I actually
or the video game.
The exact type of person he is, because I had cousins that were the exact same age when this came out. Mm-hmm. And two of them, they were only 2 years apart from each other, so they were right around there, were also the type of people that went around the country to follow Pearl Jam as they played like free shows in the parks and stuff like that. And they were really into that type of indie music, and they were really into video games, and they were on that borderline of they weren't quite millennials, even though they were starting to fall in that age, but they also weren't quite Gen Xers, even though they had just come from that, and they were just in that weird middle ground. And honestly, they also felt like they never grew up. So I kind of I knew these people directly.
And that might explain maybe the appeal of it to an extent. I think for me, it doesn't bother me that you make a character like this. So when people are like, oh, he's a loser, or that he has, aspects about him that are not admirable, that doesn't bother me because, a lot of fiction is about characters who are not admirable, and there are characters, all throughout literature, like Bloody Macbeth, Macbeth has got a lot of negative things you're not supposed to like, but there are enough things that about him that are kind of admirable that you end up kind of liking him. So character wise, whatever. I think the thing that gets me about this, and I've tried to kind of put my feelings into words because it's hard for me to kind of express why I don't like this. And I think the best way I can say is it's not the character. I feel like it's the author that is rubbing me the wrong way, or what the author is coming across, how he's coming across to me. And the best way I can say this is, when I was a lad, I played a lot of video games, or I tried to, and I was so bad at them. And I was so bad at them, but I wanted to be good at them, and so I used cheat codes. And that's how I played video games. I played video games on cheat code mode. And so my experience of all of these classic games for very much the early part of my life was just essentially not experiencing the way you were supposed to, and not experiencing the way where you really worked for the good ending. It was, I put a code in and I basically cheat to get to what I want. And I feel like structurally, Scott Pilgrim is on cheat code mode, as opposed to earning my investment in the story and in the characters and in the character arc, at least for the first volume so far. Again, I've not read the others, so I'm only going off of volume 1. But I feel like the author was basically using a cheat code or cheat codes to get me to care about things.
And I'm guessing those cheat codes are the many pop culture references.
Correct. So the fact that he's channeling so many things of oh, you know this, oh, you know this, oh, you could totally know a guy like this in your life. And I'm like, those are all cheat codes. Because at the end of the story, when I added up what I had, the only thing I care about at all is essentially the sort of love triangle soap opera situation. Nothing else is set up properly. None of the action scenes are set up properly. The character arc is not set up at all. It's just LOL. I can say something kind of clever, stylistic, cheat code, God mode, and ergo people are going to like what I did. And that
Which,
really
man,
rubbed me.
If that's not a description of the entire MCU right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's something that, it's systemic in a lot of what we see in.
Well, I mean, the trend you're talking about is the Whedоnism of fiction, and that's definitely was already in swing by the time this was being produced. So there's definitely something to be said about that. But I guess I kind of understand it, but I mean the where that's you're coming from. No, I think you're making some valid points on it. But my rejoinder to that is that the only thing you're supposed to care about at this point in the story is kind of the nature of the love triangle aspect of it.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's the thing is that the story is not really about the love triangle, but the love triangle at this point in the story, it's so beginning of where it's going to be that becomes the stage on which these characters play out their tattered pasts, their broken presents, and their potential futures.
Then I don't, and I hear that, but then just give me a slice of life story. And there's a whole history of manga that is just slice of life. And I'm again, I feel like this guy, maybe it was insecurity. Maybe he felt like I have to do something else to make my work stand out. But again, it felt like he was just employing or attempting to use, okay, I'm going to put the Konami code in and that's going to give me an extra 30 lives, as opposed to really digging into the slice of life aspect of it. Because like I said, the other parts are so poorly integrated in, and some of it is kitschy and stylistic. So I'm not gonna critique every single thing that gets used. But like the conceits of the science fiction elements were hilariously badly implemented, and it left me just like feeling nothing. And I'm just like, okay. And then it was just like, oh, well, I can just LOL laugh that off with a pop culture or a sort of a meta, because like he uses meta stuff in here, and some of it's good, some of it's actually pretty clever, and some of it I feel like, again, it's just he's trying to essentially like do level select and get to reader investment through that. I'm serious, and I think it's totally fair to use that metaphor, considering that he does. Like
Yeah.
a chunk of this book.
Well, I think I'm not questioning your metaphor at all. I mean, it's hilarious. I'm not 100% convinced it's accurate, but it is hilarious, and I can definitely see a case for that.
All right.
But it's like, you know, it's a slice of life romance comedy book, and I feel like you're trying to, you know, compare it to a work of serious drama, of like serious like action drama, when it's definitely not the skin that it's wearing.
Well, I'll give you an example. So let me find it. You know, let's get Metal's. We got to get Metal's rebuttal here.
My rebuttal.
Oh yeah.
Is starts off with what the primary genre of the book is, which the primary genre isn't romance. It's not even action. The primary genre of the book is comedy, which is the main focus of the story throughout the entire time. Even the entire plot, like it's actually just set up for punchlines. It's a series of jokes that does have a character arc. There is development and stuff that happens, but it's a delivery mechanism for a certain type of humor.
I just wish I were laughing.
Yeah, I didn't laugh. The only times I laughed at this are when he did the little meta things where it was like, you know, which is normally meta humor can grate on me, but like when he'd be like the next morning or technically afternoon, those little narrative asides, because they're not super obnoxious and they're just kind of little clever ways of essentially being kind of punchlines. Those I did, you know, I would smile at or chuckle a little. Everything else just didn't do it for me.
What I found was that the whole time I could tell where it felt they were trying to be funny. You can see where there's supposed to be a joke there. It's just not landing on me. And the result is that like 80% of the book is just this slog through dialogue that I never feel is actually going anywhere. And then, you know, here and there in these tiny little tidbits, they'll suddenly throw in this crazy out of nowhere absurdity that's suddenly this sci-fi video game stuff. And I'm like, okay, where the heck did this come from? And then after 2 pages, it's like, okay, where the heck did it go now? And we're back to slogging through dialogue. And
yeah, I didn't feel the dialogue was a slog at all. Like I said, I finished the whole 200 pages in less than an evening. So
wow.
I didn't feel like it was a slog at all. I did find it funny, and one of the things that I specifically found was funny in the thing is that Scott is so convinced of his own awesomeness, even though he's broken, even though he has this he doesn't even acknowledge to himself his own hurts. But everyone else is pretty deprecating to him, except
when there needs to be a boss fight, and then suddenly he's so right. good that he can do a 64 hit combo and not even take a single hit. Right. And I'm sorry, maybe what I'm not getting. Go ahead.
You just don't accept that it's like a fantasy, like that is because his fighting prowess, like that's the one thing he's good at. The thing that's not even humanly possible.
But that's my problem is that, you know, it always comes down to this nerdy video game fantasy stuff as if that's supposed to be, the main idea behind the book. And if that were, and I keep, racking my brain, because this is what happened. Originally, I didn't know the thing existed until the movie was starting to the trailer started coming out. And even then, I was still racking my brain to figure out what the heck is this. So I read the synopsis on, I think, Wikipedia, came out even more confused than I was, right? Went and watched the movie, and I think somebody had said, well, it's like, oh, it's because he's such a nerd that everything in his life seems like a video game, right? So I watched the movie, and I'm expecting to kind of pick up on something like that. Like maybe there's a metaphor going on here. Like, what is the reason for doing all this pop culture stuff? And I came up, unfortunately, away with nothing. It just seems like it's strangely randomly thrown in there for no reason. So finally, when I got, when we started doing this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to read this book. And maybe this time, if I'm reading the book, something will finally present itself. The fact is, I find every one of these books has, again, 5, maybe 10% of that stuff in it. And in between it is just 100% perfectly normal, everyday stuff with a bunch of snappy dialogue that's supposed to be funny.
It's slice of life.
And I'm like, what genre is it?
Slice of life.
Right. I'm like, what genre is this? What is the point of this story? Because I have no idea what I'm supposed to be caring about at any page turn. It could suddenly be out of nowhere randomness that seems just randomness for the sake of randomness, which I do not like either. I was hoping there would be a reason for this stuff to be happening. Again, some kind of metaphor or something. Maybe it would have been cool if I could see it, the world through the lens.
If I can jump in there, for a second, so we can keep things moving there. But I think what Cartoonicus is saying, which I kind of identify with, and I'm not saying that you guys, it's definitely, I think, a debatable point. But I think that the eclectic, tonal, and genre mix that is Scott Pilgrim, and I think that's fairly, we can all agree that this is an eclectic mix, and it's an eclectic mix of tone and genre. I think that's we can all, I think, pretty much sign off on that.
Yeah.
And I think that because it is that mix, it is leaving some of us who read it with like just kind of confusion, I guess. Because in theory, like I'm a gamer, like I totally am, like, and so like in theory, I should be I'm part of the target audience for how this should click. Oh, he made that video game reference. Oh, he made that reference to fighting video games. I actually know what he's talking about. And yet somehow it really was rubbing me the wrong way. And it was basically kind of what I think Cartoonicus mentioned, which was the genre and tonal shifts really left me at a loss for what
basically
I
it
was
just doesn't
supposed to
feel
be.
like there's really any intent to anything they're doing, right? So it's always whatever the author decides he wants to throw in there.
Really?
Well, I'll put it this way. If I'm supposed to be laughing, then why is there so much drama? If I'm supposed to be dramatic, then why does none of the plot make sense? And do you see what I mean? Where it's like every time I want to pin down where I'm going,
I don't know.
It causes frustration if you're trying to dig into it.
I don't feel that frustration at all, and I can't understand how you could come to that conclusion. I mean, it definitely has drastic tonal shifts, but it's I mean, that's kind of the nature of the lack of discipline that shapes Scott's like reality. So I mean, it's sort of like it reinforces his innate immaturity and lack of focus. I thought
maybe that would mean something if again
I think
it
you're
were
reading
more than 10% of the novel.
I think you're reading, and this is not it's not an accusation, but I noticed this when I was doing a review the other day, and I read something and I saw a whole lot more in it than someone else did. And he was just reading the work purely based on like what the story just had in front of it. Mm-hmm. And what I was reading into it was, hey, I know this about this author, and so my access point to the story was not just the story. My access point to the story was my connection to it, essentially. And so I feel like because like one common denominator that both you and the Metal have that Cartoonicus and I don't, and is that both you and Metal are able to relate to Scott Pilgrim because you either see yourself partly in his journey or you know someone who did. And for me, I don't know, I can't speak for Cartoonicus, but for me, I see someone who is trying to hello fellow kids me, and that just like that forecloses my ability.
Age, right?
I'm just saying
he was writing that contemporaneously to being my age. It's not a hello fellow kids.
It reads to me like hello fellow kids, and because of that, that avenue of my investment is foreclosed, which only leaves me with like the raw material that was in front of me, and that's not enough for me.
I don't.
That's the best way I can probably explain it.
Take hello fellow kids from it, mainly because you would have to have more than about 5 or 6 pages of that stuff to actually feel like it was being presented to you that way. Again, the fact that I'm almost being drawn in, especially from having known the movie, as if this is the idea behind the series, only to find it just being generic situation after generic situation, page after page after page after page after page. And I'm always like, I don't know why this stuff is in here, because it just seems to come out of nowhere and disappear just as quickly as it came.
Let's move on, because I feel like we're at that point where we're coming at this from very different angles.
Yeah, I would probably have some better things to say if I wasn't like sick as a dog during this episode.
Sorry.
Right.
So sorry.
We have an advantage.
Yeah, my brother works fast food, so periodically he just brings the plate to our house.
Oh dear.
But like, I'm just trying to also process, like, because I'm kind of with Reese here. I see some of the things you're saying, or at least the argument for it, but I'm not seeing like most of the stuff. Almost like we're reading different books, and I know we're not, but like it could feel that way when you're looking at something from 2 different perspectives.
So here's kind of the where I'm coming from with it, right? Okay, so you're reading Batman, and Batman is a gritty detective in a bat suit. He deals with crazy clowns and animal themed villains, juxtaposed with real mobsters and fairly authentic violence, or at least the portrayal of authentic violence. And then Kid Flash stumbles into town, or Impulse stumbles into town, and then there's a wacky adventure that still feels like a Batman story, even though there's a super-powered, super fast 12-year-old in it. Right? Yeah, I like it total dissonance and these elements of the superhero universe that don't seem like they should go together at all. So sort of like, and yet we just accept it as Western comic readers. They don't even blink at it. Yes, there are aliens. You're reading Superman, Batman, but yes, there are aliens. Yes, there are talking plant creatures. Yes, there are people there living on the moons of Mars. You don't even question it.
So now know why I have never been that close to superhero comics.
All right, I gotta disagree with Cartoonicus, but let me say that there's a nuance here that is important, because you're bringing up an important point. Grant Morrison uses this as an excuse to turn Batman into Scott Pilgrim whenever he wants. So whenever people call him on why are you doing random bullcrap nonsense with a superhero story, Grant Morrison will use this exact defense. Like he does it in Super Gods, where he's like, "Oh, how dare you? If I want to just put random monkeys talking, well, look at the history of superhero comics. There were monkeys talking all the time," and it's just like, okay, Grant. I think my thing is that superhero comics are able to, if not accomplish, they are able to use a disguise. They're able to trick the audience. And I'll say it's a trick. They're able to trick the audience that the superhero world you're given has a sort of consistency to it, even if it's not consistent, because it isn't. But they're able to trick you, and the degree to which they're able to trick you is usually how we often appreciate that continuity that we're seeing, because it's like they're able to take a DC world that in its history has had talking monkeys all the time here and there, and they're able to kind of like shuffle that to the margins, and so to be like, okay, and to give you the impression that Batman's world is in fact internally consistent by providing a lot of internal consistency from issue to issue for the good writers. My issue with Scott Pilgrim is that I did not detect that level of consistency, and it felt like whenever I wanted to have it, the author dodged it with one of his cheat codes, and that lowered my investment overall, because I was like, I shouldn't even bother to ask this author to have a world where, you know, there's any sense of consequence, because when he wants there to be serious emotional consequence, it's there. But anytime he doesn't want it to be there, it's not. And it felt arbitrary. I guess that's I think that's the best way I think I can frame how I'm reading it. And I'm not, obviously, like I said, people read it differently.
I honestly didn't really think about that myself.
But that's kind of, and the scene that's right in front of us is kind of an example of that. It's one of the most frustrating moments I had reading the book.
Well, now this is the page that broke my brain. And
I love this page.
I don't know if you saw it. Metal hated that I said this, but I got to say it on the stream here, because I was I was expecting there's something important about Ramona, like she's an alien or she's from the future or something, that she has this ability to apparently, you know, find an interspace subhighway through your brain and just use it because she wants to, right?
Which is a cool ability, by the way. I'm not going to lie. That's a cool ability. And the minute I saw it, I was like, you know, I might need to take some notes and put that in, because there are ideas in here that are cool. I'm not going to lie.
But instead they go with the absurdity of just, oh, that's just a thing, right? And
I hated that.
I was not expecting how they ended up explaining it, because she says, and I quote, is it on the same page or is it on the next page here? Yeah, it's on this page, where she says, oh, you guys probably don't know about these in Canada. And I was like, wait a minute. I don't think I had realized they were in Canada up to this point. And I'm not sure why.
They tell you earlier in the story.
Like the first page, isn't it?
I may be forgetting. But I also wasn't expecting her to be American.
But they tell you.
In the party.
And
then you hear like Amazon.ca, which is another confirmation it's Canada.
Yes, but I'm saying even before I picked up the book, I'm not sure why I was thinking she was Japanese. It may have been because of the anime design of the games, but all of a sudden it hit me like there's a joke here that I feel would have been made in just about any other story, where I would have expected him to be the American and her to be the foreigner. And the joke would be,
she is the foreigner.
Oh, but I know, but I'm saying her to be the non-American foreigner. And the joke would be, and I'm not saying I like this joke, but you're going to see it all the time. Oh, you stupid Americans, you don't know anything. Your education system is messed up, right? Instead, not only is she the American, but he is a nationality that you just don't expect really to see put on display often. You know, not many things happen in Canada unless it's with like the Northwest Mounted Police, right? If you're going to do an everyday average story that happens in the city, in the West, it's probably going to happen in the U.S. And so the American here says,
unless you're Alpha
Flight. Right. Apparently in America, this kind of quantum physics is just readily taught in schools. Now, this would have made sense if this was, again, like, you know, I could see them making the joke, the Japanese are really technological, they do all this, and the Americans are stupid, right? Instead, I'm seeing it completely swapped and utilizing a nationality I was not expecting for the main character. And then she says, and I quote, I was wondering why, you know, I guess you guys don't know about him here. Always empty up there, meaning in his head. And I'm
Well,
like,
it's not just
hold
his
on.
head. There's subspace highways everywhere.
Right, but I'm like, did she just call him empty-headed? Right? Is that this joke? And if that's the case, is she calling it Canadians empty-headed?
No, just Scott. And one, this isn't even calling Scott empty-headed. I think you're missing like you were almost close to what the joke is, but you're missing like most of the joke altogether.
Well, and that's the point. Again, if he had been an American, she had been a Japanese, I wouldn't have liked it. Totally would have understood what the joke was. But I had to ask, and I haven't found out who the author is yet. But I'm like,
Bryan Lee O'Malley. He's a Canadian.
Okay.
He's a Korean Canadian.
And so all I could think is this a self-hating Canadian who sees Americans as these
Cartoonicus?
super
All
high-tech
Canadians
advanced
are self-hating.
people? Okay,
Oh,
then
come
I
on,
may be
don't
onto
that way.
something. Is that what he's doing? Does he see Americans as this advanced, first
Vindicator
world
is
society?
not-
They're all apologetic.
Yes, that's true. I'm exaggerating for the sake of the joke, but the idea that like Canadians come here to become famous.
Right? So
they come here to become successcul in many fields.
So maybe I'm right. Maybe
all of our best Hollywood actors are Canadians who escaped.
I was gonna say Guardian. I think Guardian is unapologetically Canadian.
I was just like, that was the only thing I could think of.
I know. I'm just messing with you.
The absolute absurdity and randomness with which this was explained.
So after that, though, because again, I kept on getting frustrated with like how these things were being used, and then I want to pause and maybe tilt the conversation another direction. I don't want this to just be like Cartoonicus and us clearly, and I didn't connect with it. And so I think it's important to allow some more time to allow for the people who did connect with it to explain why they did.
Yeah, it is fair to say. It is fair to say there has been a whole lot of gobsmacked confusion coming from this side of the table.
Well, we were confused reading it, and this is one of my confusion points.
That's that statement that you just made. While I'm not trying to disacknowledge the veracity of it or validity of it in any way, because I believe that you're speaking the truth as you see it, but I can't understand how a world in which that statement is possible exists.
All right, you gotta be a little bit. You need a bigger imagination then, because I can see how you could connect to it, but there's
I can't see how you could be confused at the same time.
It's not even just confused, because I understand. Yeah. I understand what's happening in the story. I get it. It's just there's my connection investment to it is just nothing. And right here, I'll give one more example, and then I think we should just turn it over to the people who connected. But we have a LOL so random. There are subspace highways in your head. Random joke about it. And then a supposedly inspiring, touching moment where she takes Scott on this, what I would assume, magical journey. Holy cow. If I met a girl and she took me into essentially an alternate dimension from volume 1, that's the best way. I know. I think future volumes end up unpacking this a lot more, but so I'm coming at it from just a volume 1 perspective.
That's not far away. It's like a hyperspace in Star Wars.
Oh, yeah,
so it's like a warp pipe in a way.
There we go. Kind of. But the way it's presented here is that is kind of an alternate dimension kind of way of traveling, which again, from a conceptual standpoint, really cool. And I'm like, holy cow, wow. And my brain goes through the paces of if I went through that, if I'm going through the genre expectation of slice of life, I'm going to be have to have a moment of pure awe where I just process what happened. And if it's a joke, then I'm expecting something to really hit me for something being funny. Instead, it literally just jump cuts to they're at her house and he just moves on.
Okay, so you've got this lonely, pathetic 23-year-old in an intentionally unfulfilling relationship, and he meets this magical mystery girl who takes him to a magical dimension called her apartment. I don't understand why you don't understand this.
No, because again, it's not really that funny. I'm sorry, it's
no,
not.
I'm not
So
saying
you
it's
are
funny.
saying
And
that
it's not-
there
and it's
are
not-
major metaphors going on here.
My
And if they
laughing
went,
is not about
and if
the
it's
joke. My
magical, then he's
laughing
not
is-
processing magically. Like it's just,
Yeah, no, I mean, Scott's
it does nothing
empty-headed.
for me.
Nothing takes.
I'm sorry.
Nothing shakes Scott because he's empty-headed. That's another part of the aspect. That's another part of the thing.
Yeah,
Because
he's not that stupid though.
the-
Like he's
Oh no, Scott's
he's normal-ish.
pretty stupid.
He's just like
Oh, yeah,
He's pretty stupid.
he's from volume one. He's basically no. He's not okay. I agree to an extent. He's not a let me think of. He's not like knuckle dragging. I'm the stupid one who does stupid
No,
things.
he's a
Like
space
he's not
case.
that.
Yeah, no,
Right.
okay.
He's your
so,
average
the whole Socrates
underperformer.
quote, right? The Socrates quote. A life unexamined is not worth living.
Not worth living. Yes.
That's the life Scott has lived.
Yeah, like
Okay,
I think
I
a
don't
good
care
way to understand this too.
unless it's just a pure joke. You don't go through space. And this is a video game kid. If he went through anything cool, he'd at least go radical. Like it's just nothing. And I'm like, it just breaks it breaks my investment if I'm laughing. It breaks my investment if I'm supposed to cry, and it breaks my investment if I'm supposed to care. And I'm just like, to be honest, the way I read this is I just felt numb. And that's just how it processed for me. And I can just take that moment and then just replicate it throughout volume one at several important points. That's how I processed it. But that's just me. That's how I processed it. And I think we should move on to the people who have a lot more who can have a lot more to say about it.
Before you do, while it's in my head, because you just reminded me of this, Reese saying that his life is basically nothing. Reminded me. I was thinking just today about the title of this first book, A Precious Little Life, and I'm not sure which of two possibilities, or if there's a third, this is referring to. Whether it's saying that his life is precious despite being little and insignificant, because every life is, and he needs to learn that, or is it using the term precious little as in like saying precious little time to suggest that he has no life?
It's
closer
precious in that
the second one.
He's not actually open to experience.
Okay.
Scott's coasting. Like this is life. A good way of looking at Scott. This is a failure to launch story, which is like a delayed coming of age, right? Scott is in a form of arrested development.
Arrested. Yeah. You just beat me to it. It was Arrested Development.
Yeah. And Scott is basically just a grown kid. I like.
How can you love that show and not get this comic?
Because Arrested Development is structurally so superior. If you watch, I've watched Arrested Development over a dozen times, and it is meticulously crafted. Every sound effect is coordinated and like synchronized. It is a structuralist's wet dream. I cannot tell you how much it is a structuralist's like wet dream. This was not a structuralist's wet dream. It may, like I said, I cannot deny that people did connect to this. Clearly, there's something that they see I don't.
Yeah, it's very clear that the two
it's
sides.
Not the structure, in my opinion. It cannot be the structure.
It's very clear that the difference between the two sides here are people who are looking for something more substantial in every page that they read, versus the people who really appreciate comedy for absurdity's sake.
I like absurdity.
Am I right about that?
For absurdity's sake.
Yeah, it's not even for absurdity's sake at all. I mean, there's okay. So like, there's two theories when it comes to world building, right? There's the world building that spends like 45 pages telling you about why your shoe buckles are blue, and there's the world building that just assumes things and runs with it.
Don't straw man our position. Don't straw man us like that. We're not.
No, I'm saying like when it comes to those, that's the thing. I mean, there's the meticulous perspective, and then the
fully admit I am on the first.
I don't need 45 pages here.
No. Okay.
I'm not asking for that.
Forgive my hyperbole, but
you're forgiven.
I think
I get it. I get it.
I think when it comes to world building from a writer's perspective,
gotcha.
Right? If you want thorough world building, you write your Bible so that nobody can ever read it. because the minute you open that up, your magician showing his tricks, right?
Right.
It needs to be in the story in a way that people, they just accept it, that's part of it, right? And right, and that's the thing is, I mean, there are ridiculous things. America's a magical world in this. Just accept it. I don't understand why you wouldn't just run with that.
Because I'm still not seeing where they are laying anything like that down in the story.
It doesn't work.
They come out of nowhere.
And it's I think I don't want to belabor the point. I think
consequences to her having this ability, right? It's not like it's ever going to come up again in the next 3 books that I've been reading. This is not world building. It's a
significant part of books 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, it comes up a lot.
Wow,
a lot.
Sure did disappear.
Well, okay. To be fair, if we are just talking about the first volume, so
yeah.
No, we're not comparing the rest of them yet.
But I mean, I think you're just from even your perspective. Well, it didn't come up again in here. Well, I mean, okay. I mean, and the thing is okay. So the evil X's, the other ridiculous part of the story, and I mean ridiculous in terms of out there. That's not just this slice of life stuff. Is when Patel shows up at the concert, and they have the big knockout drag out fight. He's also from America. all of these remarkable, over the top things are coming from outside of Canada throughout the whole series, with the exception with one slight exception.
It's true. Knives is she Japanese?
Except for his fighting abilities,
Chinese,
and
except for he happens to be the best fighter in
Ontario,
the
whole province.
I'm just saying it's not just
Wait,
America.
Is that the idea? This is the self-hating Canadian who finds Canada boring and so is reaching out everywhere else, including
everywhere else is reaching out to him.
I want to say something positive. One of the jokes that did actually land for me is Patel's quest to notify Scott that they're fighting. That's funny. And it's funny, and I think that may be fair to is structurally it was set up payoff, and the setups worked. And even the payoff of he's like, I think I delivered that in a snowstorm, and he's like, I didn't read it.
He delivered it himself in a blizzard. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And Scott still didn't read it, and he deletes all the emails. And because it's consistent with the character that we have, the setup really worked, and the payoff worked. So that got a thumbs up from me. And it's a humorous situation of I'm going to notify you that we're going to duel, and then the guy just can't be bothered to read the email or the letter or the handcrafted note. That to me
came out of nowhere.
That got a chuckle out of me.
I was far more interested later on. I think it was in book 2 with the vegan guy, because he was actually set up as a character.
Yeah, but we're not really talking.
But just to give a comparison.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, part of it too is that Scott is really just always in his own head, right? And I don't mean physically, though that does happen sometimes, but he is a space case. He is oblivious to most of the world around him. He just kind of exists in his head. He's in a world within a world.
Even in the way he interacts with his friends, there are reasons that Kim is so horribly angry with him so often. And he doesn't even acknowledge that there are bad feelings, or why there would be bad feelings between them, which is also a plot point for later on in the stories. But
no, I got that set up. That I got the idea, and I totally accepted that this was supposed to be a character who's supposed to be put on a journey of growth. I'm not supposed to like him in volume 1. That did not bother me. I'm okay with a character who is so. That's fine.
The one part that, because I mean a lot of that stuff, okay, I guess you could call it shtick, right? The much of the world is shtick, right? The superpowers, the massive fights, the turning into coins, the extra lives, all this stuff, right? That is window dressing for the thing. but not the meat of the story. But I think the one thing that I had a lot of pause over in the first volume is why Ramona is interested in Scott. And I mean that because I mean Scott brings nothing to the table, right?
That's
He
funny
brought-
because I actually
He's bringing us 3
took it for
coins or whatever.
I actually took it for granted the what do you call it? Not Breakfast at Tiffany's. Is it? Yeah.
You know what? I'm actually less bothered. Sorry to interrupt. But I'm actually less bothered because of that aspect, because I think I've read so much slice of life manga where the like class queen supermodel star is like interested in the otaku neat, and I think I've just absorbed so much of that I don't even blink. So I'm not even saying that you're not wrong. I'm just saying that, like it's just,
I wasn't even going that far. Just that we've definitely familiar with, you know, the quirky, interesting girl who comes into the boring guy's life.
Yeah, the magical pixie girl.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about it is the first volume would seem up until the very end, I would think would almost seem that Ramona is taking the place of this magical pixie girl. But that's not. There's more going on in her story, but that doesn't really get to in the first volume.
Well, I mean, we even know a little bit of it here, right? It's very limited reasons, but there are reasons why Ramona would pick Scott. Part of it is his persistence, which is it can be a good character trait. But I mean, she's going through stuff herself. You hear roughly about that during Julie's party, right? You don't know
Clearly
too much,
she's
but you
got
know a
her
little
own
bit about it.
past.
Yeah. So she might even be running. You don't know if she is or not, but like they're hinting she might be running at this point. And she's clearly not connecting with a lot of people. Like she connected with Julie, but everybody else only has things to say about her, not like personal experiences with her. So you meet this kid. Well, he's not really a kid, but he acts like a kid, right?
Yeah.
You meet this guy, and you feel guilty too because you've been running through the dude's head, and he's not even aware of the thing that you're doing, so he's becoming obsessed with you. And he seems, at least on the surface, like a sweet guy who's just kind of oblivious. And you're on the rebound anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things I think is really interesting about Scott's oblivion, right, is that his oblivion, I think, might actually represent a bonus to Ramona's perspective, because he doesn't demand anything. He's not demanding anything from her either. He just wants to be around her, right? And I think that makes sense later on in the series, but even in this first volume, that in itself, I think there's a basic appeal into just wanting to be wanted as opposed to being to having something more involved. In fact, there is in the volume 1, I think there is a comparison between the way Ramona views Scott and the way Scott views Knives. That is for me, I think that's actually really interesting to look at. And it's not as I do not get the impression that it's as instrumental as Scott's desire to just find somebody safe to spend time with. But I definitely think there is a comparison in that.
If she's got
because Knives
clearly,
I think Knives represents more than just.
I'm sorry, I could not make it out when you both were talking.
Oh, sorry. You go ahead, Metal.
No, yeah, I was saying I think Knives represents more than just safety, right? And it's kind of part of the whole like Arrested Development thing, but it's also like if you look at everybody else's view on Scott, everyone who kind of knows him, even the people who are favorable to him, they do look at Scott as if he's a loser, right? All of his friends look down on him. Everybody else, they kind of just laugh at him. He everyone knows him, but he's the laughing stock, right? But Knives doesn't know him. She just meets him. She's a kid, sort of. I mean, by Canadian law, she's legal, but she's in high school, so she doesn't know anything.
Right.
And this is just this cool person who was helpful on the bus, and he's an adult that can introduce you to adult life through proxy. And you're somebody who hasn't been tainted yet by all that. So it's not somebody who looks at him like a loser. So Knives is kind of an out for him in a way.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to say one thing that I think is really interesting of Scott at this point in the story is how disinterested he is in wrecking Knives' like innocence, right? Like that's actually a plot point.
He values her innocence.
He values her innocence. Their
maturity level is essentially the same. He's basically the impression I get is that he's basically stuck at 17, and so like if he were 17, him dating her would literally be they'd be on the only difference is his number. And the fact he should be more mature than he is, and there's only little bits of like, you know, like his awareness that he shouldn't be kissing her. Essentially, he should be comfortable doing it. Is like one of the only bits of like awareness that he has. So it's they're very clearly like. And I think
that does match with the other forms of awareness that he has, right? Because it's all centered on his age. Like when she brings up, when they're at the library, he says, libraries remind me of elementary school. And she's like, that must feel so long ago. And anytime he's reminded of his age, it's a bitter point, and he kind of becomes aware again. And the difference between their age is another reminder of his age.
Yeah. Does that mean this story just did the reverse of the anime 1,000-year-old lolly trope?
I don't think so.
No,
I'm not familiar enough with that trope to comment, but it sounds I don't know.
I would say that Scott Pilgrim is trying to acknowledge that the kind of age gap thing in manga while very clearly approaching it in a sort of nah brah. Like that's the impression I get, because there's plenty of manga that like does the sort of like Lolita forbidden love kind of thing, and it's very unapologetic about it. And Scott Pilgrim is like, everyone kind of knows, even without coming right out and saying it, including Scott, that this relationship isn't really like the healthiest thing that I could be doing.
It's not very kosher.
Because you were talking about him basically being 17 on the inside. So I was thinking about when every other anime does that. It was like, hey, want to meet my girlfriend? Oh my gosh, she's like 6 years old, you sick twit. No. It's okay. She's actually a 1,000-year-old vampire, right?
Well,
so this is totally fine.
I see what you're saying now, but I think it has more to do with the fact that like one of the impetuses in the series is that Scott needs to grow up.
So like Knives represents it's kind of like that safety, but it's not moving on, while Ramona is the call to adventure. And he's still kind of torn between them, but he really wants that call to adventure.
I'm okay. So the symbols that it's okay. The thing with Scott Pilgrim that I am okay with is the symbolic readings. The symbolic readings click pretty well and they work. It's the surface structure, I guess, that I'm presented with that doesn't. And I'll mention one more and see if how the panel plays with it. Am I the only one who's kind of disappointed with that final fight? Because I'm like, if we're doing manga and we're not doing cheat codes, then the typical setup, even in manga or in Western comics, is to have the bad guy have a moment where you go, oh, wow, he might be stronger than me, or I'm going to have to like, dig deep down to win this fight because the bad guy actually hit me a few times. Right. And I counted the punches here. Patel doesn't land a single hit like the whole fight. And I was just kind of like, so there's all this like flashy action. And I'm like, are you serious? I don't think he lands a single hit.
The first boss in a video game is always a chump.
It bummed me. I'm like, well, he won. Yeah, sure. I guess
Scott up to be what I was saying. Like, he's such a nerd. His entire life is like a video game or something. And then the payoff is he's so good at video games that this ends up being, his edge and the way he wins it or something. Then that would have been okay. But
right.
I knew exactly how this ended already, and I was
Sure.
still disappointed.
I don't know. Like I said, I would have wanted more from, again, because he's clearly using stylistic action, and I want to invest in that. I like stylish action. I like fight scenes that got some movement to them, and I'm like a good old kung fu movie, like with even Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee kind of has this reputation for being kind of undefeatable. But in fights, like the big fight he has with Chuck Norris in that one film, like he spends the first half of it on the back foot. Chuck Norris knocks him down a few times, and you can see Bruce Lee like calculating, okay, I'm going to have to switch up my styles, and there's like no dialogue for it. It's all internal. And I love scenes that are paced like that. And this one let me down. So again, you take it or leave it, but
there is a game, of course. I'll bet that may work a whole lot better in some ways because you're the one having to take on each enemy individually.
Dude, even in a video game, you take hits. Even in the side-scrolling beat 'em up, you're gonna, unless you're like that good, and you're like the speed runner with the tool-assisted speed run. You're taking the damage.
Every fight, no matter how easy it is still an investment for you, and so you can very much more easily do that kind of. Okay, we just got past that part. Now on to the next part.
That didn't bother me in the slightest, and I'm not sure if it's because the whole fight scene is like framed around the narrative backstory, or if it's because it's the first boss, or because or
that it's also a parody that's making fun of like the power of friendship that's often used in like manga and anime.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this.
That didn't bother me in the slightest.
If that is the idea, I really hadn't thought about that. The idea of it being the first boss.
Do you see what I'm saying about cheat codes, though? This is like playing a video game with cheat codes. I'm like, by golly, and that rubs me the wrong way because like I grew out. Here again, the metaphor here. So I get it, the symbolic aspect of it. But I had to grow out of playing video games with cheat codes and actually earning my victories. And again, I get the symbolic read on that, but reading it just as a straight story, again, I was left with another angle that I wanted to invest in that I couldn't.
They could have done that in this and have him beat Scott up and be about to win, and then present Scott with something that's literally presented as a cheat code and have him put it in. And that's his Deus Ex Machina.
Well, Patel is clearly supposed to be someone similar to Scott in many ways, right? Because Ramona left him back in high school, and she said he didn't become really evil until later. But then when Scott beats him, a lot of a boss or a video game character, or even just a normal baddie's worth is the loot that they drop. And his loot is so worthless that it's not even enough to cover the train ticket back home. And Patel's like, he's basically like all bark and no bite.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking it didn't bother me at all. I found the entire fight to be hilarious.
Most of the pop culture references in the whole series so far, have been fairly obvious, and on occasion are actually interesting because of that. Like I loved it when he was looking at the label. Spoiler alert: the label on a drink, and it was referred to as a power up, and it has all the stats, like it's a D&D character sheet and all. If somebody else hadn't seen it and explained to me what the deal was with these darn coins, I never would have put that together. It was like the most random thing in the world to be reading. Okay, he beats him, and why does he turn into a bunch of coins sitting on the ground? These were not like portrayed as Mario coins that appear brightly above his head or something. It's just like, oh, look, there's 63 cents on the ground.
And enemies drop loot.
What's that?
Enemies drop loot. This is what happens in video games.
It was so subtle. It was like, it annoys me.
I got the scene pulled up if you want to take a look.
Totally gone. Well, and it happens twice so far too. But it totally would have gone over my head had I not already had someone explain that to me. Yeah, it's just like a couple random coins, and they're normal real world coins. You know, they don't feel like
Yeah,
I got
power ups.
that part. Him turning into coins, like I mean, it didn't.
It's grating on me.
So yeah, just after the scene, oh man, $2.10. That's not even enough for a Subway back home.
That's a little funny. I'll give it that.
But that's an example of the kind of randomness that grates on me, though, because he has absolutely no reaction to this. Somebody literally just turned into coins magically in front of you. Oh, cool, money. You know.
No, it grated on me a teeny bit. But at this point in the story, you sort of have to just give up. If that's like, because like letting more things bother you, there's a certain point you just gotta be like, all right, this I'm not gonna connect with this.
That bothers me even more, knowing that that's what he's relying on is just give up and let me do what I want to do.
No, I get it, and that bothers me. It bothers me about the author's approach.
I don't think that's a fair statement. I think he thinks it's funny and cool, and I agree. So. I mean, if you want to continue, then you may have to, but I'm going to relish it.
Absurdist humor takes a particular kind of person to like it, and it takes a particular amount of skill to pull it off. I don't know about this one.
Right. Anyway, so that's I think we're done. I think we've said enough on that score.
So anyway, So the following scene, or I can't remember which one it is, where they go on to talk about that there are 7 evil ex-boyfriends, where they'll have to defeat. And so Scott says, "So does this mean we're dating?"
Wait a minute, does she not say that until after?
Right,
no, she already mentioned that they were dating, but like Scott is Scott.
No,
so
I mean the 7 evil exes. Patel
mentions it. I think Patel mentions it, but they go to talk about it again in the scene.
But the idea that he has to defeat all of them, that doesn't happen until after the fight?
Yeah.
I think it's mentioned during the fight.
Yeah, but where it's really made clear for the audience is here, where it's reinforced, because it's kind of like
because
I'm trying to figure out here if this idea of actually what he's going for, and if they're trying to connect it to that. And the only ways they'd be able to do that is by telegraphing, oh, this is only the first of 7. Because if so, that totally went over my head. But
it's made clear here, and this is kind of like, this is when they're officially dating. That is how volume 1 ends. Is an emotional setup. There's basically 2 kind of threads that are being presented. There is the emotional thread of Scott and Ramona's relationship, which clearly still has the knives baggage at the very least that has not been addressed. So clearly it's like, okay, so this is the relationship set up not in terms of everything is smooth sailing. The relationship is clearly set up in terms of there going to be drama. So there's that thread. That thread is clearly laid out. And then there is the action thread of there's going to be way more of these fights. So volume 1 very clearly does outline those threads.
Indeed. So, after a thoroughly confounding episode of the Mattriarchy,
which we knew this is how it was going to end.
Oh, yeah, I knew there'd be conflict, but I didn't.
I keep wanting to I want to give you guys more opportunities. You want to dig into the things you connect with. I don't want it to just be bagging on.
And that's fine.
By all means, continue.
I think part of the things that I connect with are the symbolic reading, and the I don't know. I thought of money, so I must have that sense of humor that Cartoonicus was talking about. So
yeah, because I see this almost like I'm reading a sitcom most of the time. Like there definitely is an overarching plot that's happening, but a lot of the events I'm reading, it's like I'm watching an episode of Seinfeld, except instead of
that's interesting. That's the second
boomer
time.
humor before that. It's I'm looking at video game humor and stuff instead.
That's the second time tonight that it has been compared to Seinfeld. And if I remember correctly, there was a reference to Seinfeld in the movie.
Yes, there was.
Well, yeah. After Scott spends the night at Ramona's house, he comes into Wallace's place and they play the bass line.
Yeah.
Jim Tooner, I think, is the one who made a reference to.
So people are seeing that apparently.
Well, he even shows you, not necessarily Seinfeld per se, though. I do think that he was a fan of Seinfeld. But, like, you see it in the comic, too. Like, there's a part, I think it was right here on the train where they kiss or whatever. And there's like a studio audience woo that happens in one of the scenes. I forget where it is exactly.
I remember that.
But, yeah, there's like a woo and it says studio audience off to the side.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, and I mean, the other thing that I think is let me ask you this, Twidless, to kind of set the stage. What do you think of Mork and Mindy?
I've never seen. I'm not a big. I do not have a huge grounding in television.
Okay.
So I never saw Mork and Mindy.
Okay.
I think I've seen part of one episode.
So for you out there in internet land, Mork and Mindy, if you don't know, is a spinoff of Happy Days.
Right.
So
it's Robin Williams, right? Like that's like
Robin Williams.
That's about as far as my knowledge goes.
Yeah, it is a Mork and Mindy is a spinoff of Happy Days. So,
okay.
I was curious to see how you would reconcile those two existing within the same shared continuity.
I think I know what you're talking about. In that Robin Williams in general is always capable of that same kind of rapid absurdism.
Well, and I mean,
he's also an alien. Like a literal outer space alien.
From outer space alien. The reason I bring it up is that Happy Days is a pretty straightforward 1950s sitcom, right? So, I mean, things a little bit out of the ordinary happen on Happy Days, but not so out of the ordinary that you couldn't possibly have heard about it on the evening news for the most part.
Yeah, the weird thing about that is that both times he showed up on Happy Days, they were just one of those dream sequences, which I've never liked those type of episodes. They just become that kind of excuse to go wherever you want. But they were dreams. But then they do the spinoff and they act as if it's all real.
Mm-hmm. So anyhow, with that, we will call it a show.
Oh, I was going to say, like, just a final note. Because this, as a comedy, this is very much a parody story. Mm-hmm. Like, very much. It's there the whole time. And one of the many things that I do think it is somewhat parodying can be what you would call the slice of life genre. Because you can look at one of the most popular ones, which is like Archie, where a lot of the same kind of stuff happens, but Archie is very much playing everything straight. Like, even when something weird happens, it is played off straight, the universe. Most people aren't confused by it. Or if they are, it would be somebody who would just be confused by anything, like maybe, I don't know, Jughead. But like this is poking fun at a lot of things, including the very genres that it sits in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I can't argue that point.
So here's the real question, boys. Are you ready for next week? Are you down? Or can you trudge through another volume?
Well, I'm up to 3 already. So
yeah, I'm gonna like it's one of those. I'm gonna keep reading, and like I said, at this point, because I've voiced most of like my issues, there's probably like. I'll probably have less to say in the sense that I'll be like, oh, well, I still have the same issues I had before, but I'm not going to like rehash all of them. I'm just going to be like, so.
Plus, this was the least dense of all of the issues, I'd say. None of them are very dense, but you've probably noticed if you've seen the movie that, there's the woo. Yeah. If you've seen the movie, this issue, because it was the only one that was finished at the time that they made the original bid, is almost play for play the exact same scenes that happened in the movie, right? Like they didn't change it too much. There's a little tweaks here and there, but that whole part kind of just plays the same. But then they had to condense everything in the movie because a lot more happens, like even per page in like mostly 3. 3 is where it starts to pick up, but in the last half, there's just like a lot that happens in it.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Very much.
I will end it with this. Actually, I'm going to say something good about the series here. Is that as like I said, I'm finished with the 3rd volume at this point, and as it goes on, I would definitely say in a couple different ways. It's still a bit of a slog to get through. I'm not exactly going to say it's growing on me, but there are certain things that they do, the art, the way the pop culture stuff is carried out, they do start to get better. And I have noticed that already.
Oh, that was something I didn't really get a chance to talk to, because personally I love the art, right? Because it does kind of have like this almost very indie, but very like cartoony, almost underground vibe. But it specifically, I prefer the black and white to the color version, because there are a lot of details where he uses the blacks and the whites together as not necessarily bits, but kind of sort of. Like with the door appearing in the snow, kind of almost appears like particles in the white that the snow is making. Like there's these like really cool images that are made in the black and white that I think you lose a little bit in the color version.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So
Because snow is important for Canada. No, kidding.
All I know is I'm starting to appreciate the artwork. I will say the animation in the Netflix version coming up is actually beautiful.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we're once again relevant. All right, Reese keeps trying to end it. Let's let him end it. Let's let him kill it.
Possibly. Okay, so next week, more Scott Pilgrim, if you guys can bear the thought. And we are here for the pilgrimage. So, I actually think I may have figured out the next Comics Creators Club, but I gotta get that all arranged in the next few weeks. So, I think I may have figured that out. We'll have to see. Anyhow, guys, until next time, get out there and read some Canadian comics.
I was wondering how you were going to do that.